Alright guys, welcome to Formula 1 News. Red Bull are continuing their war with McLaren. This time though it's off the track. A big scalp that McLaren took away from Red Bull in terms of a signing over the last few months or so, but Red Bull are absolutely not willing to let him go anywhere earlier than they were initially planning. That means that Will Courtenay will continue to work for Red Bull during the upcoming season, despite the fact that he will be joining McLaren shortly after that. Is this a good move from Red Bull, especially given that he might already have one eye on his future team that he's going to be working for? Is this potentially going to hurt McLaren's attempts to challenge Red Bull next season? Very much enjoyed your thoughts in the comments below. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always. This is Carlos Sainz at the Williams factory at Grove, of course. And well, here he is. First day at Grove, he says. We know, of course, that he did the test back in Abu Dhabi with Williams, and this is his first day. Now, a few interesting things to note here, especially on Williams and the progression of their car. Of course, we talk about a lot of rumours on the Ferrari, the new Mercedes, the new Red Bull, the new McLaren, but of course there are less articles, and understandably, on the cars that aren't expected to be quite as strong. Wittекesser puts together an article here on the new Williams, saying that it's going to be dramatically different from the Williams that we saw last year in 2024. More downforce on the harder compounds, that's a big intention, and they're also talking about Sainz as Williams being a massive positive boost potentially to the way their team is going to go. Talking about how his technical feedback is going to be a blessing for the team. So this is very interesting. Now, how valuable Sainz is going to be to this end is a question. It does also raise questions on their thoughts on Alex Albon, because, if they thought that Albon was the man for the job, going to be, lead driver potential for years to come, maybe they wouldn't say these things, but of course they're going to gas up their new signing as well. But Sainz is joining with the intention to drive fast and score points, but equally to give them good, solid technical feedback and analysis of their upcoming car, the 2025 version, and also, I imagine, simulator running on what might be the 2026 car, because drivers are ranked in many ways. One of the features that is valuable is how good a driver's technical feedback is. It is a comparison point that teams make, and it is one of the reasons why teams like to sign big name experienced drivers, because they can help the team unlock tenths in the future. At the end of the day, there's only one man, two men, the drivers, that are in the cockpit, sitting in this car, driving it at 200 plus miles an hour, inches off the ground. They know what it feels like, and Sainz could be very valuable to that end. Even Charles Leclerc says that with Carlos Sainz's input and, what he can do for the team, the turnaround at Williams is only a matter of time. Speaking of Spanish-speaking drivers, however, we know that Sergio Perez is out of Red Bull, and Franco Colapinto is not into Red Bull, as we thought that he might actually be for a brief moment. Instead, he's going to Alpine. It seems almost inevitable, as we have discussed so far over the last few days. The Colapinto will be replacing Doohan at some point during the upcoming season, unless Doohan comes out of the gate absolutely flying. This is a big point though as to why, despite the fact that this is a questionable decision from Alpine, it was always a talking point that the sponsor value Colapinto will bring in could well provide serious value. Now, if, let's say from Williams' point of view, they were thinking, do we keep Franco on the bench basically, or do we sell him to Alpine? Well, it does come down to some degree to sponsor value. Colapinto is fast, and he may be somewhat crash happy, maybe not so much as Sargent, but look, Colapinto does seem like a solid Formula 1 driver from what we have seen, and able to compete on that level. So I get that from Alpine's side, but of course they had to pay money to Williams to get him. So is that worth it when they're probably not going to win the championship? I mean, they're not going to win the championship, you know what I'm saying, right? They might not be really in that ballpark to compete, and also I'd expect Gasly to outperform Colapinto in, maybe not quite the same way, but Gasly should be the number one driver, right? So why would you pay all this money? Well, it could well pay you back in terms of sponsorship revenue and stuff like that. The Colapinto brings in huge following in South America, and apparently lots of Perez's sponsors, now they're out of the sport, will be coming to Colapinto from that region, and therefore supporting Alpine. This makes a lot of sense. I'm sure that, Briatore was having discussions and theorized this beforehand, but also it's interesting because in order to get the most out of the sponsor value, he's got to drive the car, right? I think that's the point. Williams can collect some sponsorship revenue from Colapinto sponsors, but if he's a reserve driver, doesn't really hit the same. For Colapinto to get the support that Alpine would want him to get from the sponsors, he's going to be need to driving the Formula 1 car, right? I would imagine. So that's why, on some level, I don't even know if it matters what Doohan does. I think as soon as what is reported to be a 6-race contract is up, Colapinto's straight in the car, and Alpine are collecting the paychecks. That's what I imagine is going to happen here. Just a theory. Intrigued to your thoughts. More drama on the FIA, as always. George Russell, among others, have complained, and I totally get it, about where their money from fines goes. Verstappen, among others, fined for various things over the years, and the drivers are saying, can you guys tell us where that money's getting spent? Is it just on a nice steak dinner in the evening? Now, understandably, the FIA are like, I can't believe that the drivers would say these things. As Tomasis says, I realise that anyone paying a fine is always slightly annoyed, but there are so many projects that you can't come to the conclusion that the money is spent for Christmas parties and so on, going on to say that all the money is spent on beneficial aspects, whether it's for safety, grassroots in motorsports, or sometimes other projects which are to do with road safety. So, fair enough. I get it. The FIA do actually do some things, but I think the drivers are understandably going to say, right, if you're fining me, 20k, 10k, 50k, can I not get some sort of receipt as to where that has actually gone rather than just a generic statement? But obviously the money goes into a pot, so it's not so clear exactly where it's gone. It is what it is. I understand why there's a bit of friction on this. I will say, speaking of friction, man, Jacques Villeneuve is back at it again. We know that he made the comments yesterday controversially on Max Verstappen, and today he said this, again controversial statement. It's clear that for Yuki anyway, that this is his last season with Red Bull, and I don't see any team wanting him unless there's a big Honda push. He says, Tsunoda will be the next driver to leave the grid. He's only there because of Honda. At some point this will stop. Now, again, very interesting assessment here from Villeneuve. I'm not sure I agree. I see what he's saying, right, about the Honda thing, for sure. But, and that's why he's at Red Bull. He's at Red Bull, as far as we can understand, because he's a Honda driver, really. And as soon as Red Bull part ways with Honda, which they will in a few months going into 2026, probably they'll part ways with Yuki, because if they really rated him as a potential Verstappen teammate, despite his obvious pace, they would have done so already. That point is fair enough. I don't think he's going to be the next driver to leave the grid. That will likely be Doohan, based on what we have just described. And for next season, will Tsunoda leave, or will he get an offer elsewhere? I think it depends. There are a few teams that could be interested. Got to remember as well, the grid is expanding next year up to 11 teams, with Cadillac coming in as well. So I think it's unlikely that Yuki will be off the grid. I'm sure that there would be teams. I mean, there have been teams over the last few months that have considered him, but it's never happened because he wanted the opportunity at Red Bull, which never arrived. So, look, I think he's only at Red Bull because of Honda, to be honest. I don't think he's just in the sport because of Honda. I think he's too quick for that analysis, in my opinion. Another update as well. Lots happening over the last 24 hours. It's deep in the off-season here, but there's still a lot going on in Formula 1. So, subscribe if you haven't already, all that good stuff. Alessandro Aluni Bravi. You guys might recognize this guy. He is the Sauber team representative. They never called him the team principal for some reason. He was in a representative role, but it's confirmed that at the end of January, he is gone. Now, to be fair, this was happening anyway because Jonathan Wheatley, of course, coming on board from Red Bull, taking charge as, team principal, etc., of the Audi project. So he's gone on to a new adventure, they say. But again, big changes at Sauber at Audi, and understandably, because of course they have not been delivering the performances they would have liked to in recent times. Let's dive though straight into some of the Red Bull stuff, because Liam Lawson will be Max Verstappen's teammate. Only 11 races that he's done in Formula 1, the least experienced driver ever to join Red Bull. Is it going to work? Yeah, I'm not so convinced. But the big point, of course, really being the relationship with some of their team members, as we'll discuss in a second. There was also this. So Pierre Wachet, of course, top guy from a technical directing perspective, now that Newey's gone anyway, was commenting on the RB20, and this, of course, is at Miami, the Miami Autodrome, whatever they call it anyway, the circuit where Verstappen famously at this corner ran over the bollard, and then, the safety car then happens as a result. Obviously, Norris wins the race, and Verstappen, that was kind of the start of the season downturn for him. Now, shortly after this, you guys probably remember that there was a adjustment made into the official F1 regulations, which kind of outlawed asymmetric braking already more so than it already has been. And it caused loads of drama in Formula 1 because there was speculation, wow, they're changing the wording to make it very, very clear that asymmetric braking, as in, okay, so there is asymmetric braking in Formula 1 naturally in the sense of brake bias. You can allow the front tyres to do more of the braking than the rear tyres or whatever if you like to. What you can't do is allow the left tyres to do more braking than the right side tyres, because if you do, that helps you turn into the corner. And teams have experimented it before, and it's been outlawed in Formula 1 for a very long time. But the FIA clarified their comment on that earlier in the year, and it was therefore speculated maybe Red Bull were doing something dodgy there. Now, of course, you know, the argument might be no, they were just clarifying it for 2026. There was nothing going on. But of course, this did coincide with Red Bull's downfall. So, you know, it was a big talking point a few months ago. You guys probably remember we discussed it at length on the channel. And Pierre Wache was talking about this problem and whether it was the case or not. Now, he obviously emphatically denies it. I just think what's interesting is the fact that he's emphatically denying it. It may be nothing, and look, it's not like this is proof or anything, but I just know that in life there is a feeling that if somebody is coming out and saying, I never did that, absolutely no evidence to support it, like, don't know what you guys are talking about, I have no recollection. Like, you know, anything to this effect kind of makes them sound, we sure we believe that, right? So I think that's what people have been discussing about this article anyway. So Wache says, basically, because that was the race where things started to go wrong and Norris won, we didn't change the car, we didn't change the way we set up the car, so it looks more like it's that the others did a big change instead of us. But to be fair, in Miami, we should have won the race. However, we weren't the quickest anymore, we were even, and clearly something changed in terms of what was done, especially by McLaren. And fair enough, McLaren brought an upgrade, they got better, but it was notable that Red Bull got worse as well. I think it's difficult to argue, especially given the statements, of course, that Verstappen made on the understeer and stuff during the season. So, yeah, then he says they were able to get less tyre deg than everybody else. I don't know what they've done. You have to ask them and not me. But I know about ourselves and what we have done with the car. The behaviour of the car was similar to what we had in China, despite the fact that it was so dominant in China and not elsewhere. We brought an upgrade in Suzuka and in China, and those things were working very well. In Miami, we were more or less there during the race. We saw McLaren found the sweet spot in terms of performance. The car didn't change, just to make it clear. There was also nothing fundamental in the car setup either that could explain why we were slower. So sure, fair enough, interesting to read, but I know that people have read this article and said, damn, Wache said they didn't do it about 3 times in 5 sentences. Like, you know, maybe they didn't do it. So, yeah, tweet your thoughts in the comments below on that one. The big debate, though, is on changes to the team, because this all coincided with drama behind the scenes at Red Bull. You've got Newey leaving, you've got others potentially leaving, you've got the Horner, obviously Marco, massive drama, maybe Jos Verstappen talking to Toto Wolff, you got Max Verstappen maybe trying to leave the team, Sergio Perez is at risk. It was all going on at the time. And along with those things, 2 big names were poached basically elsewhere. So Jonathan Wheatley, top trackside man for them for years, was often the one in the steward's room when Max would get into trouble. He's leaving to become Sauber Audi, their team principal. We've known that for some time. So they're allowing him to go. Now, this is what's interesting, right? So there's 2 big names, Jonathan Wheatley and Will Courtenay, head of their strategy side. Now, they've also got other great strategy people. So from a pure efficiency perspective, will it affect Red Bull that much? Maybe not. But it's just the general sentiment, right? So Wheatley, he's allowed to go. Fine, you want to go and join Sauber, Audi? No problem at all. Like, you can go early. We're happy for you to go because they're going to be bad, type thing, I guess is the implication. Of course, for McLaren, it is a bit of a different story, right? So as Red Bull have now confirmed, they have no interest, it seems, in negotiating an early release with McLaren for Will Courtenay. So therefore, he will see out the rest of his contract at Red Bull, which lasts until the middle of 2026. So, yeah, here he is, trackside, top guy from a strategy side over at Red Bull, and this is what they have to say. It was known that Courtenay's current contract with Red Bull runs until the middle of 2026. It is normal in such situations to negotiate an early exit, right? Because this guy has decided to leave the team. He's got a better offer elsewhere. His head isn't necessarily fully in the game. Like, you know, in his head, he's probably thinking he's a McLaren man now to some degree. But instead, they are keeping him on board, which is pretty interesting to me. So, you know, McLaren was eager to cut some form of a deal so it could slot Courtenay in as soon as possible, and potentially even for this season. It is understood, though, that Red Bull have not replied to the emails and have shown no interest in such an arrangement and plans for him to see out the full length of his contract, which is interesting. Like, look, this is business. Red Bull can do what they want to do. do, whether out of spite or otherwise. But the bottom line is that McLaren want Courtenay in. They are potentially willing to pay more money to make that happen, to buy him out of his contract earlier. But Red Bull are emphatically saying, no, we're not interested. He will stay as part of Red Bull, which obviously shows they think he's very valuable to the program, first of all, in the head of race strategy side. They don't want him going to McLaren because I guess the point from Red Bull might be McLaren's strategy is at times underwhelming. Their decision-making is at times underwhelming. And Will Courtenay, arguably, with all of his experience at Red Bull leading up that team that had the best strategies for the last several years, he will know a thing or two about how to improve the program there at McLaren. He will join midway through 2026, but apparently not a second earlier because Red Bull won't let him go. Is this a good or a bad decision? From a pure business point of view, it's probably a good decision from Red Bull. They stop him going to McLaren. Of course, the question is it going to be detrimental to them? If Courtenay is, a McLaren man or whatever, okay, he's still contracted to Red Bull and he's still working his best to make Red Bull succeed. But is he going to do everything in his power to help Red Bull get to the level they want to be at? Not necessarily, given the fact that, he's got a new contract elsewhere. Even Christian Horner says Courtenay's been here for 20 years. We talked about other roles in the group. He was offered a bigger role on a very high salary from McLaren. At that point, you've got to say, fair enough, good luck, go for it. And of course, it gives the opportunity as well for Hannah Schmitz to step up to the plate. She has kind of been the face of Red Bull strategy now for the last couple of years. So she will be taking over officially on that capacity when Courtenay steps away. But as I say, not a minute earlier than Red Bull are technically allowed to. So very interesting stuff. Just before we close out with a couple of tests have been going on at Jerez. Of course, we talked about it a couple of days ago. Ollie Behrman's been there, as has, of course, Kimi Antonelli. Just a bit of footage on this. Here we go. This is Andrea Kimi Antonelli in the W11. I will say it's always weird to me seeing a W11 not in the black livery. It really should be in the black livery. But so yeah, this is the W11, the fastest Formula 1 car ever built in the hands of Andrea Kimi Antonelli around Jerez. Now, okay, he goes outside of track limits here, but to be fair, when this car was being driven in Formula 1, the track limits were different. So you were allowed to do this on many corners, on many tracks. So yeah, here you go. You can see it's Jerez track anyway. And this is Antonelli getting some good testing laps in, it seems, in the W11. So pretty mega stuff. Very much interested to your thoughts on all this in the comments below. Just one final thing, the birth year of the champions. So when each of our current drivers was born, who was the driver's champion? Thought this was kind of good. Makes me feel like, the grand scheme of things, I'm not old, but there's almost half the grid. I'm born in 99, like Lando, and almost half the grid now is somehow younger than me. I'm not really sure that's possible, but yeah, I get it, I guess. Of course, yeah, my birth year, 99, Hakkinen was the champ the year before. Hakkinen was the champ as well. Alonso born in 81. It was Nelson Piquet. Hamilton was born in the year that Prost won. Piquet again in 87 with Hülkenberg. There's not many drivers in that ballpark anymore, is there? I know that Magnussen was one. I know that Perez was one in this kind of age bracket. But now you've got Sainz with Schumacher again. Interestingly to me, I guess it makes sense, but the fact that Gasly, Albon and Ocon all born in 96, kind of interesting. Damon Hill, of course, won his only title in that year. Jacques Villeneuve in 97 for Verstappen and Leclerc. Interesting, obviously, after Villeneuve's comments on Verstappen yesterday. Russell and Stroll with Hakkinen, as with Norris, and then plenty of Schumachers. And then this I thought was very fascinating, and probably the first time it's ever happened. I can't imagine that it's happened too often. Probably this has got to be the first time, right? With a driver who was born in the year that another driver on the grid was the champion, right? So Behrman was born in 2005 when Alonso won, and Antonelli the same in 2006 when Alonso won with Renault, and Alonso's still on the grid when those guys are joining the grid. That's kind of remarkable to me. Very much interested in your thoughts in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoyed. Subscribe if you're new. Take care, and I'll see you next time.